The OCD and Anxiety Podcast by Robert James Coaching. Hello and welcome to the OCD and Anxiety Podcast, where we explore how to have a more positive relationship with anxiety disorders, taking back control so that you can start living the life you choose and not the one chosen by your fears. Hello and welcome to episode 402. I hope that wherever you are today in the world that you're doing very well, and despite OCD and anxiety being present potentially and frustrating you, this podcast is hopefully here to support in some small way. And if you did need some extra support, I do actually offer a free 20-minute session. To get that, you can head over to my website, robertjamescoaching.com. There you can book in directly for that free session. Or if you prefer, you can send me a message and let me know about what you're struggling with. In today's podcast, I'm going to be talking about the importance of letting go of beating ourselves up when it comes to OCD. So often we can get really frustrated with ourselves for why we struggle with it. And we can get really fixated on trying to push it away and kind of getting annoyed with ourselves. I shouldn't be like this. Other people aren't like this. So why am I like this? And unfortunately, it just tends to perpetuate things and make it even worse and even harder to deal with. If you find the podcast helpful, please do subscribe. Most people who actually listen to the podcast are not actually subscribed. So if you could do that, it would make an enormous difference to us. So that would be fantastic. So many thanks, guys. If you have any questions at all, do please let me know. And off we go. Here's a quote to get us started today, and it's by somebody called Mazza. Not having to control or fight OCD can lead to a sense of freedom or lightness. Your energy can then be spent on things that you find meaningful. And this is very, very true. As we know, OCD, it takes up an enormous amount of energy when you're going round in circles with it. And, this is most definitely energy that could be put into all sorts of different areas in our lives. And, sometimes I talk about this connection between OCD and creativity, where not everybody, but a lot of people who struggle with OCD also identify in some way as being a bit of a creative person. They want to express things. Maybe you're interested in art or music or poetry or whatever it might be for you. And I think a big part of it, or a big part of that reason is actually because when you're struggling with OCD, you are, creating a lot of problems for yourself in the process. No, it's the imagination is running wild. It's finding all sorts of bizarre things to focus on that other people just don't focus on. They literally don't think about it at all. But people with OCD are very good at kind of using this kind of spotlight to shine the spotlight on things that most people just wouldn't find interesting or wouldn't pay attention to. If you think about it this way, if you do have a spotlight, normally the spotlight would be on the stage. It would be right in the center. And, when we are in a more or less good place, that's where the spotlight is shining. But when OCD starts to win, what we're really doing is we're moving that spotlight all the way over to the left or all the way over to the right. And in the process, we're shining on something that nobody else really wants to be paying attention to. In fact, all the people who are there in that theater are going to be like, what is going on with this person controlling the light? They're kind of like shining it onto the curtain when it should be right there on the stage. And so maybe you move it back again to the center, only for it to kind of move all the way over to the left this time. And now you're like really paying attention to the fire exit or something like that. And it's we get stuck there as well. The spotlight literally kind of freezes in place. Maybe it's an old spotlight that's got rusty and it just kind of gets stuck in that position, and we find ourselves just really paying attention to that area, and we don't quite want to kind of give that up. And unfortunately, when it comes to kind of beating ourselves up in relation to OCD, this can be part of the problem that we've got so used to beating ourselves up and going around in circles with the OCD and feeling bad about ourselves, feeling frustrated with ourselves, thinking that that we can't do this, that even sometimes the things that you might be employing to try to deal with the OCD, well, you may get caught up in perfectionism about how you do that, and find that the very things that you're trying to use to try to help you with the OCD just become parts of the OCD itself, where you find yourself ruminating on how to best apply a particular technique, and then you realize what you're doing, and then you get really angry with yourself and really frustrated. And this is what it can be like. And, I think it's really important to notice when you are getting unfairly kind of angry and upset with yourself about your struggles with OCD. It's so important that you can shine a light on that, and that you try to lighten up. No, that's taking it a bit too far with the spotlight analogies. But of course, unfortunately, if only we could lighten up, because we know how difficult that can be in those situations. It's very, very hard, to start to actually kind of let go in that situation, because we're so invested in what we're doing with the OCD. We're so invested in trying to fix it and to solve it, and we kind of know on one hand that the things that we're doing, are not really helping. So often, as I was just talking about, the things that we're trying to do to fix it end up being compulsions themselves if we employ them in a way that we're trying to kind of reduce our anxiety or push things away. And so, it is incredibly frustrating at times. There's no getting away from that. It is really annoying, and you can find yourself getting really angry. And oftentimes, sadly, we turn that anger on ourselves. We start blaming ourselves and criticizing ourselves. And it's really just not fair. We have to learn how to start to just let go of that a little bit, start to loosen up on that. And like I say, it's a habit, though, that is hard won. Most people who struggle with OCD also seem to struggle with this sense of a strong inner critic, this part of us that comes up and criticizes and judges, and it really wants to kind of put us down in a way. And it's not necessarily doing that from a bad place, though, and that's important to point out as well. If you do have a strong inner critic, normally it's about kind of protection. It's this part of us that wants you to kind of do things in a very specific way. It doesn't want you to make mistakes. It doesn't want you to do things that, could lead to you being seen or portrayed in a bad way. And so, of course, it's trying to make sure that you're not going to make any mistakes. And the way in which it does that is constantly alert you to things that you could do wrong, that have gone wrong, that potentially could go wrong in the future. It focuses on all of the negative aspects that could cause in your life. And then, of course, when we listen to it too much and we get caught up in it, well, we find ourselves going around in circles in the OCD cycle, trying to deal with all of the anxiety that's coming up about those thoughts. And then the frustration comes in. Here I am again. I've got in the trap again. How have I done this? I've been learning about acceptance commitment therapy, or I've been practicing exposure work, or I've been doing the Wim Hof method, or whatever it is that you've been doing. And, maybe you've got a bit of respite. Things have been a bit better for a while. Only, you fall back into old familiar habits. And I think one thing that's really important to point out here is, really what you're trying to do is you're trying to change a habit that's potentially been there for quite some time. even if you haven't struggled with OCD, specifically OCD, for all that long, there may have been habits of pushing things away and, of dealing with things in a certain way, or kind of thinking styles, that are not particularly helpful, that contribute towards the OCD. So really what you're up against is kind of habits that may have been there for a long, long time. And when you're trying to change those, it's so important that you do your best to bring self-compassion to the table here, to recognize that what you're up to is not easy. Actually, you're trying to change these habits, and it's OCD is something that is very familiar. We get comfortable with performing the compulsions. We get comfortable with pushing things away. It's what we've learned to do, and it's kind of a kind of protective mechanism in a way. When we push away difficult emotions that we don't want to feel, well, that kind of helps us in some way. It makes us feel like we're controlling things, and that we can do something when strong and difficult emotions come up. So in some regard, there's a part of us, I think, that doesn't want to necessarily let go of that, because on some level it's helping us. But we know on another level that it's keeping us in that OCD trap. But this is why I think you need to bring compassion and patience and kindness to the table if you can, because we need to recognize that it's not easy. If you have this habit and you've got stuck in this kind of loop and this cycle, this OCD cycle, for a while, maybe for a number of years even, then, learning to undo that and learning to actually feel your difficult emotions, to be more in the present, to let go of trying to come to conclusions in your ruminations, and to just come back to the present and say maybe to them, and all of these kinds of things that we try to work on. When we start doing that, of course, it can be really, really difficult at first, because you're trying to pick up all these new skills, and you're going to have some success with it, but you are then going to also have some setbacks along the way. And this is where the compassion and the kindness, it's so important that we try to show that to ourselves. It can be, as little as just some few encouraging words. It could be doing something kind for yourself. It could just be learning to feel your emotions even when you really don't want to. All of these things really help with self-compassion and kind of learning to let go. Another important thing, I think, is to recognize the self-judgment. Try to get more in tune with your, or try to have more understanding of what your inner critic is like. What kind of voice is it when you're speaking to yourself in the inner critic voice? What typical things do you say to yourself? Is it very kind of repeated? Is there a certain kind of structure to it? What type of words do you use when you're getting caught up in the inner critic? The more awareness and attention you can bring to this inner critical voice, and the more that you can just identify it and call it out. Some people like to give that inner critic a name, for example, and some people like to give it a silly name, and some people like to joke with it. Some people like to be sarcastic with it and thank it. It doesn't really matter here. The idea, though, is just to get a bit more aware of that inner critic and try to bring a bit more kindness, a bit more understanding to it. But don't listen to it quite as much. Don't take it quite so seriously. You can thank it. Say, thank you very much, inner critic. Thank you for giving me that lovely thought. But you know what? I've got more important things to do. And then you can practice refocusing on your values, doing activities that you enjoy, speaking with a family member, doing all those other things that you'd much rather do, a creative project, anything at all that you value, learning how to refocus on that when we find ourselves getting caught up, with the inner critic and, kind of listening a bit too much to the negativity that it likes to give out to us. If instead we can learn to refocus our attention on other things, or if we can learn how to kind of stop, if we're at home and we're somewhere safe, we can actually stop and, kind of meditate on what we're feeling for a few moments, actually pay attention to how it feels when we're triggered by the inner critic. And, by doing that, well, we can learn to kind of let it go. We can learn to recognize that uncomfortable feeling for what it is, and to recognize that it is actually just a feeling. It's not to do with the thoughts that are coming up. It's to do with the fact that we've been triggered by something. And if we just allow ourselves to feel it, well, it may move on. So there we go, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed that one. If you have any questions at all about anything I've spoken about today, do please let me know. And I will see you next time. Just a quick reminder that if you want to get a free session, all you need to do to get that is to head over to my website, www.robertjamescoaching.com. And there you can leave me a message and we can arrange the free session. And now just a quick reminder of my disclaimer. Any information that you view on my website, Instagram page, Facebook group, or anywhere else online, or any information that you listen to on the podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for actual medical or mental health advice from a doctor, psychologist, or any other medical or mental health professional.